Hi all, I'm Sandhya Sambashivan. I'm going to take a session on exploring Salesforce composite resources. A warm welcome and thank you for watching this session. Special thanks to Amit Chowdhury for hosting this session in Apex Hours. Let me introduce myself. I'm Sandhya Sambashivan. I'm Salesforce Architect at UST. I'm 6X Certified Application Architect and Kochi Developer Group Co-Lead. Also, I am a Trailhead Ranger. You can reach me in Twitter and LinkedIn. Let us see the agenda. First is introduction on composite resources. Why composite resources? Different composite resources, limitations and consideration. Let us see what is composite resources. We have seen standard Salesforce REST APIs which we use to create or update data in Salesforce from an external system. These APIs we do one at a time. Composite Resources is an enhanced form of REST API which executes a series of REST API requests in a single call. It helps you to do multiple operations like read, create, update, and delete Salesforce data in single call. You can use output of one request as the input to a subsequent request. Response bodies and status of all these REST API requests are together returned in a single response body. Also, all these series of REST APIs are counted as a single call towards your API limits. This is executed in the context of the same user. Composite resources consist of a URI which is having API version followed by composite word. The format is JSON. HTTP method are get and post. Authorization is bearer token. Also, it has a composite request body and composite response body. Here you are seeing an example of composite request body. On the left hand side, you can see the format, and on the right hand side, you can see a sample. Let's go through the format first. First one is a parameter all or none. It's a boolean which specifies what to do when an error occurs while processing a sub request. If the value is true, the entire composite request is rolled back. If the value is false, the remaining sub requests that don't depend on the failed sub request are executed. Next parameter is collate sub request. When this boolean is true, sub requests are collated and the processing speed is faster, but the order of execution is not guaranteed. If it is false, collation is disabled, then the sub requests are executed in the order in which they are received. You can see a list of composite requests. So each of these item is called a composite sub request. That means each of these API call is called as composite sub request. You can see a sample code of composite request body on the right hand side. Here the all or none is true. You can specify whether to collate or not collate the sub request. Then next is the composite request. Here you can see two post methods. The first one is to create an account record with name as Southern Containers and type is prospect. You can see that URL is specified here where we have given the account object. v52.0 is the API version followed by sObjects and then the account. Also, there is another parameter called reference ID. This is a parameter which is there in the request and the same parameter we get in the response as well. This helps an external system to identify whether the record they have inserted or updated. If there are multiple records and they want to identify each of these record what they have inserted into Salesforce, they will be able to make use of this reference ID to understand it, since it is returned in the response as well. So the first one, the response, we will get the ref account as the reference ID. For the second one, you can see that the URL contains contact, reference ID is given as ref contact, and the body is having first name, last name, and the email. This is the composite request response body. On the left hand side, you can see the format, which consists of a list of composite sub request result. Right hand side, you can see the sample. You saw the sample request earlier, and this is the response of that request itself. So you will be able to relate the request and response. First, there we have inserted account. So here we are getting the Salesforce ID as the composite response ID. You can see a success as true, means this API request was a success, and the location which specify the ID with the HTTP status code as 201, and the reference ID is also returned. Next is the contact response details. You have the ID, Salesforce ID of the contact. Again, the same parameters as we saw for the account is there, where success is true and there are no errors. If some errors happened, then it would have listed here. Location is given here, and HTTP status code and reference ID. This is how a response will look like. Why composite resources? So we can use composite resources for making multiple REST API calls for a single call. The processing speed can be made faster by collating the sub request. We saw the collate sub request parameter when we were discussing the composite request body. It improves the performance of the application by minimizing the number of round trips between the client and server. No additional coding is required at Salesforce. It is sub request that matters. The entire series of sub requests counts as a single call towards your API limits. This is a synchronous response. That means as soon as you send the request, you will get the response. There are multiple ways in which the composite resources work. It can upsert up to 5-level deep relationships. We can upsert related or non-related records. Also, we can do a get sub request, and the result can be input to next post sub request. It can handle more complicated data. There are different composite resources available. The first one is composite, next is batch, then sObject tree, sObject collection, and graphs. Let's see Composite API. Composite API is having the same features of composite resources we saw earlier. It can execute series of API requests in a single call. Output of one request can be given as input to a subsequent request. Response bodies and HTTP status of the request are returned in a single response body. It also counts as a single API call towards the API limits. Formats are JSON and XML, and the post URL is API version followed by composite. Now let us see a demo of composite using Postman. I have already logged in into my Salesforce environment, where I have created a record type called service account in account object. As you can see here, the post URL is my Salesforce environment URL followed by data, and then the API version is v52.0 and followed by composite. I have already given the headers here. So going to the body now. In this composite request body, you can see that all or none is given as true, and then it is followed by 3 composite requests. So first get is to query record type ID from account object, where developer name is service account. Now using this get query record type ID, I am populating the record type ID field of my second sub request. Second one is to insert an account record. At line number 16, you can see that I have referenced the reference ID of the previous get method to populate the record type ID. Now let us move on to the creation of contact record. So here you can see the first name, last name and email given. Along with it, you can also see the account ID, which is again referring the previous account which got created. You can see here that at line number 12, I have given the reference ID as ref account. So that is the reference ID which I am using to populate the account ID field. Let me click on send. The record got created. The first one is the record type ID. The second one is the account ID which got created, and the third one is the contact ID which got created. You can see that HTTP status code is 201 and the reference ID is also returned. Now let us see in Salesforce whether the record got created. I have opened the Salesforce org now. I'm going to refresh the screen to see whether the record got created. You can see that one record got created. The name of account is Southern Containers and the type field is having the value as prospect. Moving to the related list, we can see that a related contact also got created. The next composite resource what we are going to see is Composite Batch. It can execute up to 25 sub requests in a single request. Each sub request count against the rate limits. Sub requests are independent. You cannot pass information between them. Sub requests execute serially in their order in the request body. So earlier when we were discussing the composite request body, we saw a collate sub request boolean where we will be able to choose whether to collate sub requests or not. So for composite batch, we cannot do that. It is always executed in serial. Formats are JSON and XML, and the URL will have API version, composite followed by batch. If a batch request doesn't complete within 10 minutes, the batch timeouts. Let's see the demo. For the batch, you can see that in the URL there is batch appended at the end. And the composite request body is different from what we saw for composite API. Here this is a list of batch requests inside which you can have up to 25 sub requests which are not related. So compared to composite API, there we were able to relate account and contact using the reference ID, but in the case of batch we will not be able to do it. So it is unrelated data between the sub requests. So first one is a patch. That means I'm going to update the name of the account which I created using the composite API. The name was Southern Containers. Now I'm going to update the name to new name Southern Containers. After that, it's a get method to query the name and the type. Let's see how it works. This is the result. First, we are getting the account ID which got updated, and after that we are getting the name and the type. You can see the name has changed to New Southern Containers and type is prospect. You can see the Southern Containers which we have already created. I'm going to refresh the screen now. You can see the record here. I'm opening this record. You can see that the account name has changed from Southern Containers to new name Southern Containers. So this is how batch works. Next is the sObject collection. This one also executes action on multiple records in one request. The request body is different from the composite. Let's see that when I'm showing the demo. After the all or none parameter, it is having an attribute list of sObjects. One request can handle only one object. Earlier we saw an example of handling account and contact when we are using Composite API. Here, using sObject collection, you can have only one object for one request. We can upsert up to 200 requests. Get, delete, patch, post are available and the URL will contain sObjects at the end. You can choose whether to roll back the entire request when an error occurs. The list can contain objects of different type including custom objects. Objects are created in the order they are listed. Let's see the demo now. For a subject collection, in the URL there is sObjects appended at the end. On the composite request body there is all or none and also there is a list of records. First one is to insert an account and second one is to insert a contact. I'm clicking on send now. I got the response here. You can see that two IDs are returned. One is that of the account which got created and second one is that of the contact. Let's see in the Salesforce environment. I'm refreshing the screen here. You can see that one account got created. This is the details of the account. Yeah, we got Rebecca Johnson also. This record also got created. Next composite resource is the sObject tree. It creates one or more sObject tree with roots of the specified type. So sObject tree is collection of nested parent-child records with a single root record. sObject trees will have, it creates one or more sObject trees with root records of specified type. Up to 200 records can be inserted in an sObject tree and it can be up to 5 records of different types. Moreover, sObject tree can be having up to 5 levels deep relationships. From parent to child, from the child to again another child, like that it can have up to 5 level deep relationship. Now, this supports only insert, no update or upsert. It supports JSON and XML and the URL will have tree followed by the sObject name, whichever object we are going to update. Here, this sObject name denotes the root object which you are going to insert. Say for example, you are going to insert account, then related contact, and under contact we have another related object. So if this is what we are going to insert, the root object we are saying as the account because we are starting our relationship from account. So that here account should be the root object. Now it's demo time. For sObject tree, the URL will have composite followed by tree followed by the root parent object which we are planning to load. Coming to the composite request body, we will be able to load the root object and the child record related records which are associated with the parent in the composite request body. It is flexible in such a way that you can load parent record and related child multiple child records, or you can load parent record, its child record, then its child record. Like that you can upload up to 5 level deep relationships. In this particular example, I am loading account and it's related to contacts. If you watch closely, you will understand that I have not specified account ID inside contact. Instead, this entire JSON is coming under the account curly bracket. So this means that it will follow its relationship when we give this inside the curly bracket. Yeah. So this is the result where We are getting the reference ID along with the ID, Salesforce record ID of the three records. First one is the account, then the other two are contact records. Let's see in Salesforce now. I'm refreshing the screen. Here is a record, a subject tree. Let me open that. This is the detail tab. I'm going to the contact. Yes, I can see the two contacts, tree contact 1 and tree contact 2. Now let's move on to the next composite resource. Next is my favorite composite resource, which is the composite graph. This was released in winter 21. It provides an enhanced way to perform composite request. It can assemble a more complicated and complete series of related objects and data. You can always choose whether to do API call for related or non-related data. Here, for composite graphs, all or none is always true. That means it will enable you to ensure that the steps given in a set of operations are either completed or not completed. Earlier you have seen that composite supports up to 25 sub-requests. For composite API, for a subject collection you saw that it supports up to 200 records. Here, composite graphs can handle up to 500 records. Delete, get, patch and post are possible methods, and the URL will have composite followed by the graph. For composite graphs, each sub-request is called as a node. There can be multiple nodes possible. Since composite graphs is more advanced and complicated one, so we'll see this one in detail so that you understand how it works. Now this slide will give you an idea how the node works or what is the role of these nodes. So the base node is connected to two different subnodes here. So you can consider the first node as the parent and it is having two child records. So first one is a composite sub request, second node and the third node, these two are also two different sub requests. Let's go through a sample request here. This is how a graph will look like. Okay, I hope you can see the screen. There are two graphs in this particular JSON request. The first one is graph 1, second one is graph 2. So let me first tell you what these two graphs do. So this graph, both of these graphs will first get a record, get a account record using Salesforce account ID. Using that reference, it is creating one. Let's see in detail. Let's analyze how this JSON request works. In this whole single API call, there are two graphs. First one I named as graph 1, second as graph 2. So for both the graphs, what is done is, first we are querying an account record using Salesforce account ID. Then using that, we are creating opportunity record. So let's see how. You can see that the method is get and the URL given is account followed by the account ID, and the reference ID here for the first one is ref account 1, then followed by the body of the opportunity. Here you can see that account ID is given as the first get methods reference ID, ref account 1.id. The first opportunities reference ID is new opportunity 1, and the second graph also do the similar request, which is querying another account. You can see that the Salesforce account ID is different for both graphs. The second query is another account. The reference ID is ref account 2, and in the opportunity we are relating the currently queried account record. Now I mentioned that all or none is default true for graphs. That means that, let me give an example. Let's say that opportunity is having another field stage name 1, which we do not have in Salesforce. Okay, so if I give the parameter as stage name 1 followed by data, then we are expecting that the first get method anyway will succeed, but the second one will fail because it will say that the stage name 1 does not exist. But that is not the case how it really works. As I mentioned, all or none is always true for graph. That means if any failure occurs, even if it is in the subsequent request, the entire first graph will fail. Okay, but the second graph will execute because that is independent of the first graph. Hope that is clear to you how this request works when you are getting a response. So this is another pictorial representation of composite graphs. So here we have account as a parent to another account, account 2, and then account 1 is having parent as account 2, then account is having 2 related contacts. Under account 2 there is opportunity and there is a campaign which is related to opportunity. Also this campaign is having a campaign member. There is also a lead which is related to a campaign member. So it's actually a very big advantage that this kind of a complicated relationship we can have it as a single request. So if you are using standard REST APIs, all of these are going to count as API calls. But the beauty of composite graph is that you can see this is a complicated API request, like because you are having so many relationships. You can do all of these things in a single call, and that too towards your API limit, it is only a single call. That is the biggest advantage what I see. For showing the demo, I thought I'll have a simple example because if I do the previous pictorial representation, it is going to get really complicated. You will not understand what I'm trying to do. So that I created a simple model here. Let's go through this relationship, what I'm going to do. Okay, first we have a graph account 1, which is having graph contact 1 and graph opportunity 1 as child records. Here I am doing the API request for 3 objects: account, contact and opportunity. Okay, so first we have the graph account 1, which is account object. Under graph account 1, we have one child record for contact and one child record for opportunity. And then there is another account, graph account 2, which has the parent as graph account 1. And under graph account 2 also, there are contact record and opportunity record, which I am trying to create. Let's see Postman now. For showing the demo, I thought I will update one record using external ID. Still now all the resources what we have seen, we have updated using Salesforce ID. There will be scenarios where external system is not knowing the Salesforce ID. So in that case, we can make use of an external ID field. If you mark the external ID as unique, then we will be able to insert and update records using the external ID. So I'll show you how. For that, I have created one external ID field marking unique in account object. The field API name is customer external ID. So here what happened is that it's a patch method. If an account exists with customer ID as 123, the record gets updated. And if a record does not exist with customer ID as 123, that means it will create a new account record with this customer ID. That is how external ID works along with API. That is about account, first account. Then you can see that there are two records. First one is the contact, and contact account ID is given here using the reference ID of the first account what we created. Second one is an opportunity. For opportunity also we are relating using the account ID. And then comes the second account. So in second account what I'm doing is that we can do relationships also using the Composite API. So I'm showing you here how to do it. There is a field called parent. It's a standard field in account. While inserting this account, what I'm doing is that I'm relating an account to its parent using the parent field. This is the syntax how you will relate a parent with an external ID. So the first account what we inserted already is having customer external ID of 123. So when we are inserting the second one, it will check whether a parent record exists with this customer external ID 123. If yes, this record will get inserted and get linked to the previous account. If it does not exist, this composite API will fail. Next is again contact and opportunity, and we are relating it to the account too. Let's see how it works. You can see the results here. On the first account, we did an upsert there. So this created equal to true indicates that the record got inserted. That means the record got created. If I run the same JSON once again with the same external ID 123, that means it is trying to update the existing record. That time this created will be false. You can see that all the contact opportunity got created, and here is our second account as well. Let me show how an error message also look like. So I will do one thing. I'm adding one extra parameter here. Name. This field does not exist in my Salesforce environment. I just created this to show you how the error will look like. I'm clicking on send. You can see that we got the error message for the first sub request. No such column second name on the sObject type of account. And you can see that all the other has rolled back because in graph by default all or none parameter is true. That means either it fully succeeds or it fully fails in case of any errors. If there was one more graph in this particular request, each graph is considered as separate. So even if the first graph failed due to some sub request failing, the second one will still execute if there are no errors. So each graph will be independent. Let's go to Salesforce now. Two accounts got created. Going to the first one. Graph account 1, in which I had populated this custom external ID field 123. Yes, it came. Go into the related tab to see if contact and opportunity got created. Yes, you can see contact and opportunity here. Again, going back to see the second account. So in the second account, you can see that parent account got linked with the graph account 1. Going to the related tab. Contact 2 and opportunity 2 also got created. We covered all the composite resources. Now let's see limits and considerations when you are using a composite resource. Not all the composite resources support create and update. For example, you know that sObject collection supports only insert, whereas graph supports upsert. That means you can create and update. So based on your requirement, you have to decide which is the composite resource you are going to have. Then this counts to your inbound API call limit only, not the outbound call limit. For unlimited edition, it would be 100,000 plus the number of licenses multiplied by calls per license type. And also you will be able to purchase more API call add-ons if required. So that is the total API call limit per 24-hour period. Then troubleshooting. So in my experience, when using composite resources, many of the scenarios you will get the error. From the error itself, you will understand what is the issue. If a mandatory field is missing or if a field has been misspelled, okay, these kind of things we'll be able to very well able to identify. But in my experience, I have seen that there are errors which you'll be having trouble understanding what is causing the error. For example, resource does not exist. Viewing this error, you will not have any clue what the error is or how to troubleshoot it. So it took some effort for me to understand what is causing the issue. So troubleshooting in some cases, it will be a bit tricky. Now, reference ID will not be there in the response for batch and sObject collection. This means that, say for example, there is an external system. They want to insert some data into Salesforce. When they are inserting, say for example, an external system is loading 100 records into Salesforce. When they load the records, they will not have Salesforce ID obviously. So when they get the response, suppose out of 100, 20 has failed, they will not understand which are the 20 which has failed. There is where this reference ID comes into picture. So for graph and composite APIs and all, we have this reference ID which is getting in the response. So they'll be able to map, the external system will be able to map. Okay, out of this 100, 20 has failed, and they will get the reference ID of this 20 which has failed. Using that, they will be able to trace which are the 20 which failed. But in case of batch and sObject, this reference ID is not returned. So we'll have to choose the resources diligently. Same reference ID cannot be used in the same transaction. Reference ID should be different in a single transaction. So that also we have to take care. Same external ID record of same object cannot be used in the same transaction. When we are using this composite resources, if I compare this with the bulk API, of course these two are not something which we can compare, but just to give you an idea, bulk API is based on the REST principles and it is used for loading or deleting the large data volumes. Okay. So then this is asynchronous and it is working on based of submitting batches. Salesforce processes the batches in the background. However, each of this batch job can be done only for a single object in Salesforce. Managing the relationships, you will have to store the relationship for upserting the child records. So that is just an idea of this bulk API. Now coming to composite request, this is synchronous as we have already seen. When you submit a request, you will get the response. The main advantage is that you can do relationships, handle multiple object data in a single call. You can use prior sub request in a coming sub request. You can have this parent-child relationships by giving that in the JSON itself. So that makes it very easy to handle. And we can use composite resource if you can load data in a few hundreds. You have seen that Composite Graph supports up to 500. So you can have to 500 records loaded into Salesforce using Composite API. So if you have a requirement where if you are currently using a standard API somewhere and there are multiple calls in that, you can optimize it by using the composite there. You can combine all these requests together and make it a composite request and use it according to your requirements. With that, I have reached the end of the session. So these are the resources which I referenced for doing this session. The first one is the Salesforce documentation, which give you a fair idea of how these composite requests works. There are more details given in this documentation, but I have covered the high level only. So you can go through this resource. Next, you saw the error codes and status code. This URL give you a fair idea on what are the expected status code and error codes. So if you go through this, there is a long list of the success codes and the error codes. You can see which are the error codes possible. So I have covered maximum what I could do in the particular session. There are more details on composite resources. Hope I could give some insights to you on this composite resources. So with that, I'm winding up the session. Thank you all for watching the session. I hope this will help you. If you have any questions, please reach me in Twitter or LinkedIn. Thank you, Amit, once again. Thank you all.